Our special guest speaker this morning, the Honorable U.S. Congressman Kevin Brady. He will open our conference as has been our tradition for many years, if this is your first time. Kevin considers it his honor to represent us in Washington, D.C., but we consider it an honor to have him represent us there and to have him live right here in the Woodlands. His leadership means our district has the biggest voice we could there in Washington. His hard work has earned him top leadership positions like Vice Chairman and top Republican in the Joint Economic Committee, Chairman of the House Ways and Means Subcommittee on Trade, very large for this area, and of course GOP Deputy Whip. His public service began while he was working at this very chamber. He commutes to Washington weekly and lives right here in the Woodlands, so he and his wife Kathy can raise their 2 sons here in the promised land, as we like to call it. The common sense that surrounds him here is what he takes back to Washington, what he fights for, free enterprise solutions for our country's economic challenges, and we are so proud to have him here today. Please help me welcome Congressman Kevin Brady.
Bruce, no, thank you, as always, for your leadership, not just of the chamber and the township, but the community as well. Appreciate all you do. Both you're just terrific. Steve, a great lineup. This is just a fantastic conference. It gives us so much of this insight, both at the local, state, and national levels, and people take away value from this event. So thank you for your leadership. And to Eric, y'all, you're really an inspiration. Leadership is acting and leading and doing what doesn't seem possible, and choosing causes that matter. And Eric, you've done all of the above, so thank you for your leadership. Let me, I was asked to talk about the year ahead in Washington, which makes me nervous to talk about that. But we're going to plunge ahead on this. And we're going to look first at the economy. I'll go very briefly through this because Greg and Gary really are the experts on the economy. Talk a bit about some current issues in Capitol Hill, including the payroll tax extension, the highway and energy bill in front of us today, and the President's budget, and then finish with the tax cliff that you and I are facing at the end of this year that's going to affect everybody in every business and every institution in this room. On the economy, Yogi Berra once said, it's hard, he said, predictions are difficult to make, especially about the future. But let's look at this year. The blue chip consensus forecast for this year is 2.2% economic growth, which is slightly ahead of last year's 1.7%. They expect that we'll create net about $170,000 a job, 170,000 jobs per month. That's important. With our population growth, 130,000 is basically our break-even. We have to have that and a little more just to break even each month. We need to really work down this unemployment rate. We need consistently between 200 and 400,000 new jobs each month. It looks like the forecast is going to be around 170,000 going forward. Again, we're fortunate to be in a region in the state that does markedly better than the national average. Here's the forecast for the rest of this year by quarter. You can see that it continues to build slightly. The blue chip consensus isn't always accurate. The blue portions there are what they predicted last year. They can be off. We're in a volatile world economic situation that can impact us, especially this Eurozone and how that plays out. But still, it looks like we're continuing to grow in this economy. This is not a strong recovery as compared to the past. The red line is the current recovery from this recession. The green line and purple lines are from the regular recovery and forward. As you can tell from where the recession began, we had hoped, I think, as a nation to be much stronger position than we are today. One thing that I follow closely is, what are the indicators of a strong recovery? And one of them is more people back into the workforce. Right now, the top green line there shows what unemployment would be of 11.5% if people were back in the workforce the way they were at the start of the recession. We've had for a number of years, as the baby boomers start to retire, start to see a bit of a decline in the number of workforce. But right now, as of last month, we have the fewest percentages of Americans in the workforce than in almost 30 years. That's not an indicator of a strong recovery. In fact, one of the indicators will be when we pull more and more people back into the workforce actively looking for jobs. That's a concern that I follow. And then this is the final economic slide. Private investment drives job creation. You've seen this slide here in the past. This is where I had my joint economic committee economists track private investment in America the last 4 decades compared to jobs along Main Street. And as you can tell, it's almost a one-to-one correlation. When businesses invest in buildings, in equipment, in software and technology, jobs grow. And there's no substitute for it, no stimulus, nothing that's a substitute for that private investment. On this side, though, you'll see where we are today. You'll see government expenditures, even though they've right-sized themselves a bit over the last 2 years, they're at where we were before the recession. Personal consumption is back where we were before the recession. But one key indicator, one key indices is private investment. And until we create the certainty for businesses to invest in those buildings, that equipment, that software, that technology, we're not going to see the job growth going forward. Let's look at the payroll tax conference agreement. It was just signed last weekend. I was the only Texan that served on that negotiating team for the past 2.5 months. It does extend the 2% payroll tax holiday through the end of the year. It does the same, extends unemployment benefits, but with some important reforms. One, we start to phase back the number of weeks that people are eligible for unemployment from 99 to 63. There's a reason for that. Every study shows that if you're out of work for a full year, your chances of getting back in the workforce are significantly reduced. If you're out of work for 2 years, your chances of getting back in the workforce aren't zero, but they're very slim. So to have a federal government whose policy is to pay for that full 2 years out of work, you've actually, in some ways, made it more difficult for people to return to the workforce. So we start to phase down to 63 weeks in most states, a little higher in the high employment states, but for most, 63. We also made some important reforms. Job search from day one. Now, it's hard to believe this, but because the people I know, when they're laid off, and they're searching for work right away. But that's not the case necessarily. And so, in fact, in the federal law today, you didn't actually have to look for work while you're on unemployment for the first year and a half. You didn't actually have to search for a job for a year and a half. And in some states, you didn't have to at all. That's changed in this law. You have to be job ready and searching from day one, which makes sense. We also took a look at the number of industries that are now requiring drug testing as a condition of employment. Yet we hear more and more companies discouraged by the number of applicants who can't pass those tests. So we remove a almost 40-year rule against states drug testing or drug screening applicants to get unemployment benefits. I think it's important we do that. One, your tax dollars ought not subsidize drug use. Secondly, they're not for the job role, for themselves or for the families, unless, frankly, they make some changes to their lifestyle. So we remove that mandate. And then finally, state innovation. The way we reformed welfare was that we started with the states. We created laboratories where they could experiment on how to get people back skills, get them back in the workforce, and it worked. Our unemployment system today is from the 1930s. Its focus is solely push benefits out to those who are unemployed. It needs to change. We need to refocus it on getting people back to work as soon as possible in a job they can raise their family on. And so we're going to allow 10 states, and I'm hopeful Texas is one, to create what we think is innovative ways to match local workers with local jobs and bring about reforms that we can take to Washington and make changes there. On Medicare, as you know, if you have a mom or dad on Medicare or are on there yourself, you can tell others how difficult it can be to find the local doctors. and it's getting worse. One of the reasons for that, Congress reimburses very, I think, poorly for our local doctors to see our seniors. And they do it in this stop and start method that our local doctors oftentimes will face a significant tax cut or a reimbursement cut. For example, as of March 1st, it would have been cut 27% reimbursement just to see a local senior. We extended fair payment to the end of the year, but the truth is we need a permanent solution. Pay our physicians fairly, and our hospitals fairly, to see our Medicare patients. That is included in the law. Also, in the law, no tax increases. That's important because we had to fight in negotiations. Every provision we sent to the Senate came back with either a tax on the wealthy or a tax on U.S. energy. We did manage to fight that back. We paid for all the new government spending in this bill from unemployment and for the Medicare payments. By cutting half of that comes out of the President's health care plan, about $11 billion. This is hard to believe. We actually had to close the loophole in welfare today. We've seen a disturbing number of people who access their welfare benefits at strip clubs, casinos, and liquor stores. What are the chances that that money accessed there is going to get to the family, the children? Probably zero. So we had to close the loophole, which just seems crazy to me. And then because the federal government workers in Congress doesn't pay, I think, their share of pensions, at least comparable to Main Street and what you pay, we've started to ratchet up both for new workers and members of Congress their contribution, which makes sense. Here is what the debate was about in Washington, dispute over this issue. It wasn't simply about whether we extend the payroll tax cut for the end of the year. It was whether we filled in the hole that it blows in Social Security. Your payroll taxes don't go to the general fund, they go to Social Security and Medicare. So when you divert 1/6 of the revenue going to senior benefits, you have a real problem. This chart, and I'm number 2 on the Social Security subcommittee in the House, shows that Social Security itself is running permanent deficits. In fact, without change, it will never break even again. On top of that, between the payroll tax holiday last year and the payroll tax holiday this year, we've blown a bigger hole in Social Security. The black area indicates that gap. The fact is, over those of us who believe we should fill that hole with spending cuts and revenues from other areas so that we didn't go further into debt and Social Security, and those who believe that this was not a major issue. And I'm driven by the fact that last year, America had to borrow about $140 billion from investors here, investors in China, and around the world. We had to borrow that much just to pay our Social Security benefits. So to send checks and benefits to seniors, we had to go out and borrow a huge amount of money. It doesn't make sense to be blowing a bigger hole in that deficit. We lost that argument. The President, to his credit, won the argument on whether that should be filled or not, had enough votes to block it, and so we go forward. But this really too tells the tale of extending this payroll tax cut for a holiday another year is not sustainable for Social Security. It simply isn't. Now that I've given you very encouraging news and very optimistic for the future of America, let's talk about changing the way we do business in Washington. Right now, the House is in the middle of a debate over highway and energy. This is something we do every 5 years, is we extend the way we fund highways and bridges and transit in America. I'll tell you, every 5 years that I've been there, most of these bills have been project bills filled with 6,000 plus earmarks, driven mainly about how you put local projects into local communities, not about getting a better bang for the buck and thinking through how our mobility challenges, where they occur today, which is at the local and regional level, not the interstate level. And so this new bill, it's a 5-year bill. It has a number of reforms, no earmarks at all, no increased gas taxes. It dedicates highway taxes for highway projects. That seems sort of like a duh type of statement, but the truth is what we've been paying at the pump, oftentimes in Washington and at the state level, has been diverted to non-highway, non-bridge projects. So we changed that at the federal level to ensure it goes into mobility. We eliminate 70 programs. I'll show you a chart there. We streamline red tape and we give state more control over not just the projects, but the permitting to accelerate. To pay for this, because we're not doing more gas taxes, but we need more revenue for highways, we create revenue the way I think it ought to be done. We grow the economy. And so in this bill, tied to it is an energy bill that, if passed, would create 1 million new jobs in America. It provides new offshore energy leases in the areas where we have the most potential, from the eastern Gulf of Mexico to coast of Virginia, parts of Alaska, where we know there's proven reserves and we know we have the companies really willing and ready to move into. If we were able to just open that access, estimates are we could triple production offshore over the next 15 years. We require the government to start allocating more leases on federal lands for oil shale, the new revolution in America. We open up parts of Anwar, a small part of Alaska, dedicated to energy production. And because the president delayed the Keystone XL pipeline, and we believe this is critical to our infrastructure, it's critical we send Canada the message that we want to be that customer, not China. America wants to be that customer. We give the federal government 30 days to approve that permit, or it's automatically approved. The reason we focus on energy, and we're an energy state and energy region, but much of the country doesn't see this as real jobs. You see green jobs as sort of the mecca to go after. But these are good paying jobs. And I took a look the other day. There's only 3 states in the nation who have made back all their job losses from the recession. 3 states. Texas, Alaska, and North Dakota. What do they all have in common? They're developing their energy in a smart, responsible way and boosting their economy as they go forward. This bill is going to face a challenge, both in the Senate, which is looking at a 2-year bill, but also in the House. We have a number of people, concerned about some of the provisions, such as moving transit money out of the dedicated fund and funding it out of general revenue. And also there are some who think we ought not be spending this level on infrastructure funding. I'm not one of them. I think infrastructure is the result of pro-growth policies in the states and the communities that have low taxes, affordable housing, high-quality schools, positive business environment, balanced regulations. That's where families move, and that's where businesses move. So infrastructure is not only a precursor to economic growth, it's the result of smart economic growth. So we need to be investing, I think, in this and paying for it as we do it. This is actually our current organization chart for our highway development. It looks like a congestion on I-45 sometimes. This is what we're changing it to. Still plenty of entities, but much more streamlined. Here's the way we deliver roads and bridges today. The process can take almost 15 years. If followed out to the end. In this bill, we cut it in half, and we think we can do it even more efficiently than that by giving states more control. The President just submitted his budget to us last week. It reflects his belief that we ought to be spending more and that people ought to be paying a fair share of taxes to pay for that spending. My concerns are that it creates a $4 trillion deficit in a row, $1.2 trillion. It adds $11 trillion over the next decade. It takes us to a level, frankly, never imagined in this country, $26 trillion. And it creates, if it were adopted, we would have the largest federal government in American history. Larger even than World War II, when we dropped everything, focused on winning the war. That's always been sort of the peak we've never ever approached. But under this budget, we would actually be the largest government we've ever had. He includes about $2 trillion of tax increases. These, on the biggest bulk, are on small businesses and families. Many of you in this room will face a significant tax increase on income, on limitations on charitable deductions, on new limitations on your mortgage deduction, increased taxes on capital gains and dividends, which, by the way, every time we reduce taxes on dividends, more of them flow. Every time we increase them, less of them flow. Yet half the seniors in America count on dividend income to make ends meet in their retirement years. It doesn't make sense. The President wants to take the death tax. The number one reason we aren't able to give our family-owned businesses and farms down to the next generation is the death tax. He increases that. He draws a bead on U.S. companies that compete overseas, as well as U.S. energy companies that develop here, with a large number of tax increases. And on the energy side, these are tax treatments that we've had as part of this industry since 1914. It's critical to our development as an energy state. It's the thanks, George. It's the George said speed it up. He didn't really. It's critical to our state, and a lot of these tax provisions are the equivalent of what the research and development tax credit does for other type of innovative industries. It doesn't make sense. And then, because I think we need to act now on preserving Social Security and Medicare, I was hoping for some reforms in the budget, and they're not there. The President does say $4 trillion, but the problem is that the spending level and rate graph, you can see, there you go. There are the savings there. As you can tell, we're spending at such a rate, $4 trillion isn't what it used to be in savings. We have to do much more. The debt continues to grow throughout this budget. We do our budgets in 10-year cycles, so we know the impact of policies in place today. Here's a slide from the American Petroleum Institute. It really lays out, the choice we have in this budget. If we increase oil and gas development, create jobs, more revenue for the government, more energy. We tax it, we lose 50,000 jobs, we lose revenue, and energy production declines. Again, this is an area of manufacturing services we ought to be promoting, not punishing. We are, as I've shown you before, we are in the spending-driven debt crisis. The red is our spending, the green is our income. We simply can't tax our way back to a balanced budget. We do have a choice in two futures, and next week we'll be unveiling again our budget to change the course of debt and spending in the United States. And at the end of the year, final point, you and I face a major tax bill. We have a number of tax relief provisions that have already expired as of January 1st, and a boatload of them that expire at the end of this year. Already expiring R&D tax credit, critical companies in our region for research and development, including energy companies. The state and local sales tax deduction, which I've been in charge of, has expired. We intend to restore it. It saves Texas taxpayers, you and I, about $1.2 billion a year. We don't have to send it to us. Depreciation, international business, and biofuels credits have expired. In the year, we just have a tsunami of tax provisions that end. All of the Republican tax rate, all brackets, all income expire and increase December 31st. The alternative minimum tax, which started out, that was the Buffett rule of its day. The AMT was the Buffett rule for President Nixon and the Democrat Congress, who were targeting 55 wealthy families that hadn't paid income tax. So rather than fix the tax code, they put in place a second tax. Now it's grown to the point where without action by the end of the year, 24 million Americans, many of you in this room, will pay that second tax. Death tax and payroll tax holiday end as well as a number of provisions, child tax credit and marriage penalty, all of which impact your body. Let me conclude with this. People oftentimes ask me, why can't you guys just work together up there to get something done? And in fact, we do. On issues like trade, we have very strong bipartisan votes, and working with the President on his jobs agenda on trade, we passed it overwhelmingly. But in spending and taxes, there is not a bitter atmosphere in Congress. It's not a personal atmosphere. There's really two different visions of where we want this country to go. And there's two different schools of thought on how we tackle those challenges that we just saw on those slides. And so I'm convinced in November, I think voters are going to make that decision, or at least I hope they do. And some of the key questions that you and I ought to be asking ourselves, and that those votes ought to reflect, is first, is the problem that the government spends too much, or that it takes too little from you? Because that will drive the future of how we tackle this deficit. Another question is, how large do you want your government? You have to pay for it. It comes out of your pocket. So the major question is, how large do you want, not just in dollars, but in scope, in power, do you want it to be? And then finally, the key question will be, are we going to act now to preserve Social Security and Medicare? These are critical programs. They can be saved. They're both financially on shaky ground. But the good news is that there's solid solutions on Social Security. In our budget we'll introduce next week a solid solution to preserve Medicare once and for all by providing more choices, and more responsibility, more competitiveness within Medicare. We can turn both those programs around because I think you've seen this. Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid continue to dominate the future of our budget. And any member of Congress or anyone that says we can balance the budget without tackling those issues probably is the budget. If you like a copy of these slides, or if you want to go deeper into it, look at the tax reform proposals, look closely at some of these issues. If you come to our webpage, we've got it set up for you to be able to click and pick the types of information you want from this slide today. So with that, George, I know that today we're not taking questions because of timeliness, so I get to ask you two questions. How many of you believe, and you don't have to raise your hands, just mumble if you want to. How many of you believe the major problem facing us is that government spends too much? How many of you believe that the significant problem is that it takes too little taxes? Here, let me count those hands again. And because I'm on Ways and Means Committee, we do taxes, Social Security, Medicare. How many of you believe we need to act now to preserve Social Security and Medicare? We've got some big challenges ahead of us. I know sometimes it gets discouraging watching what's going on in Washington right now. I can tell you being in the middle, but it is more frustrating than you can imagine. On the other hand, there's not a problem on that slide or problem I've seen yet that we can't solve. Honest to goodness, we'll use common sense, use the solutions that are occurring in private enterprise, in your businesses, in these communities itself. We just tell the truth about what troublesome these programs are, give you the ideas and options. I guarantee you that today we can solve this. Thank you again for having me here today. Take care.